If you take one more step, you will answer to me. The voice came from the shadows, calm enough to make every person in the room stop. Emily Carter stood frozen beneath the crystal lights of the Blackwood estate, her worn black uniform still damp from the rain outside, while two strangers waited beside her with orders to take her away. She had no idea who they were, only that they had arrived minutes ago claiming she had been involved in a serious matter concerning the vampire court. Emily wanted to believe there had been some mistake. She was a waitress. She worked 12-hour shifts, counted every dollar before paying her bills, and lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat in downtown Seattle. She had never belonged in places like this. Yet somehow, tonight, she had become the center of attention in a room filled with people who looked as though they had stepped out of another century. "I already told you," Emily said softly, keeping her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." One of the men glanced toward the tall windows. "You will explain everything to the council." Emily's fingers tightened around the strap of her small purse. "I haven't done anything wrong." Nobody answered. The silence felt heavier than the rain beating against the glass. Then Emily noticed something strange. Every vampire in the ballroom seemed to be watching the same person. At the far end of the room stood Adrian Black, the man everyone had warned her never to approach. CEO, king, legend. His name was spoken in whispers by humans and vampires alike. He looked no older than his early 30s, but there was something ancient in his stillness. His skin was almost unnaturally pale beneath the chandelier light, even paler than Emily's own fair complexion. His dark hair framed a face so composed that it was difficult to tell what he was thinking. His silver-gray eyes rested on Emily. He had been silent since she arrived. Emily had never spoken directly to him. She had only served him coffee twice during private events, and both times she had tried very hard not to spill a single drop. Now, as the strangers prepared to escort her toward the doors, she looked at him one last time. Adrian did not move. Emily lowered her eyes. Maybe the rumors were wrong. Maybe the Vampire King truly did not care about humans. She took one step, then another. The ballroom doors opened. Cold air swept inside. And suddenly Adrian spoke. "Stop." One word. Nothing more. Yet every person in the room obeyed instantly. Emily turned around, her heart pounding. Adrian walked toward her slowly, each step echoing across the marble floor. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes had changed. They were no longer distant. They were focused entirely on her. "Emily Carter," he said quietly. "Who gave you permission to take her?" No one answered. For the first time that night, the people who had come to remove her looked uncertain, and Emily realized something that frightened her more than being taken away. The Vampire King had been watching her all along. Adrian's question hung in the air, and for several seconds, nobody seemed willing to breathe. Emily looked from him to the strangers beside her, trying to understand how a single sentence could change the entire atmosphere of the room. One of the men finally lowered his eyes. "Your Majesty, we were acting under the council's authority." Adrian stopped a few feet from Emily. "I did not ask whose authority you were acting under." His voice remained quiet. Somehow, that made every word feel heavier. The man swallowed. "We were instructed to bring her before the council." "For what reason?" Silence. Emily felt a strange chill move through the room. A moment ago, she had been the person everyone wanted to question. Now, even the people questioning her seemed afraid to explain why. Adrian turned toward Emily. "Did anyone tell you what you supposedly did?" Emily shook her head. "No. They only said I had to come with them." "Did you agree?" "No." Adrian's expression hardened for the first time. He looked back at the men. "Then she stays." The command was simple, immediate, final. The two strangers stepped away from Emily. No argument followed. No protest. They simply moved aside as if the decision had never been theirs to challenge. Emily stared at Adrian. "Why are you helping me?" He did not answer. Immediately. Instead, his eyes settled on her left wrist. Emily instinctively covered it with her hand. There was nothing unusual there, at least not that she knew of. She had always worn a thin silver bracelet her grandmother had given her when she was 16. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on it. "Where did you get that?" Emily looked down. "This? My grandmother gave it to me. When? Years ago." Something unreadable passed across his face. "Take it off." Emily hesitated. "Why?" "Because I need to see it." His tone was not threatening. It sounded almost careful. Emily slowly removed the bracelet. Beneath it, a faint mark rested against her fair skin. She had noticed it before, but she had always assumed it was a harmless birthmark. Tonight, however, the mark seemed slightly darker than usual. Adrian stared at it, as though he had just seen something impossible. "That cannot be there," he whispered. Emily's stomach tightened. "What is it?" Before Adrian could answer, the tall doors at the opposite end of the ballroom opened. Several members of the Vampire Council entered, their expressions controlled but clearly displeased. At their center was an elderly woman named Lady Eleanor Whitmore, one of the most respected figures in the court. She looked directly at Emily, then at the mark on her wrist. Her face changed. "Your Majesty," she said slowly, "you need to understand what she is." Emily felt the room grow colder. Adrian stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her from the council's attention without touching her. "Then explain it," he said. Lady Eleanor took a careful breath. "She is the reason someone has been searching for your kingdom's lost bloodline." Emily stared at her in confusion. "I am just a waitress." Adrian's eyes remained on the mark. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "that is exactly what they wanted you to believe." "Then tell me the truth," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the ballroom. "What does this mark mean?" Lady Eleanor looked toward Adrian before answering. "It means your family is connected to an ancient covenant that the vampire court believed had disappeared generations ago." Emily stared at the faint symbol on her wrist. "My family. Your grandmother knew more than she ever told you." The words landed harder than Emily expected. Her grandmother had raised her after her parents died, teaching her to work hard, stay kind, and never trust people who demanded obedience without giving a reason. She had never mentioned vampires. She had never mentioned a royal bloodline. Adrian looked toward Lady Eleanor. "You said someone has been searching for it." "For years," Eleanor replied. "And tonight they found her." Emily's mind raced back to the strangers who had arrived at the estate. "So they knew about the mark?" "Perhaps," Adrian said. "Or perhaps they were following orders from someone who did." Emily looked at him. "Then why did they want me taken to the council?" Lady Eleanor answered before he could. "Because there are members of the court who believe the safest way to control an unknown power is to isolate the person who carries it." Adrian's expression became colder. "That is not protection." "I agree," Eleanor said. "But not everyone does." A quiet murmur moved through the room. Emily suddenly understood that the danger was not outside the estate. It was already inside. She looked at Adrian. "If I leave, will they stop looking for me?" "No." His answer came without hesitation. "Then what am I supposed to do?" Adrian studied her for a long moment. "Stay where I can protect you." Emily almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the situation. "You barely know me." "That is true. Then why trust me?" Adrian's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "I do not trust easily." He paused. "But I trust what I have seen." Emily frowned. "What have you seen?" "A woman who could have walked away from a frightened child outside this estate 3 nights ago, but stayed until help arrived." Emily remembered the little girl she had found near the gate during the rain. She had given her the last of her food and waited with her until the girl's family came searching. It had seemed like an ordinary act of kindness. Adrian had apparently noticed. "You saw that?" Emily whispered. "I see more than most people realize." Before Emily could respond, the lights above them flickered. The mark on her wrist suddenly glowed with a faint silver light. Every conversation stopped. Lady Eleanor stepped backward. Adrian's attention snapped toward Emily. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I am right here." A soft sound came from the ancient doors behind them, followed by the turning of a heavy lock. Someone had entered the estate without permission. Adrian looked toward the guards. "Seal the west wing." Then he turned back to Emily. "Whatever happens next, stay beside me." Emily nodded. For the first time that night, she realized the truth was no longer something she could simply walk away from. Someone had been searching for her for years, and now they finally knew where she was. The heavy lock turned again, and every sound in the ballroom seemed to disappear. Emily stood beside Adrian, staring toward the western corridor. The faint silver mark on her wrist was still glowing beneath the chandelier light. "Whoever entered the estate knows you are here," Adrian said quietly. Emily swallowed. "How can you be sure?" "Because no one enters this wing by accident." He turned to the guards. "No one leaves until I give the order." The guards immediately moved toward the corridor, but Adrian remained beside Emily. Lady Eleanor watched them with a worried expression. "Your Majesty, perhaps she should be moved to the royal chambers." Emily looked at Adrian. I'm standing right here. For the first time, the corner of his mouth almost lifted. I noticed. Then a soft bell echoed from somewhere beyond the corridor. Once, twice, 3 times. Lady Eleanor's face lost its calm. That signal has not been used in over a century. Adrian's eyes narrowed. What does it mean? Someone has reached the old library. Emily frowned. Why would anyone want a library? Eleanor looked at her wrist. Because the answers about your family are hidden there. Adrian immediately turned toward the corridor. Emily followed without thinking. Wait, Eleanor called. If the mark is active, the library may respond to her presence. Adrian stopped. Then she stays with me. They entered the west wing together. The hallway was darker than the ballroom, lined with portraits of ancient vampire kings and queens. Emily walked beside Adrian, trying to keep her breathing steady. How old is this place? She asked. Older than the city. That is not possible. You would be surprised how much history has been forgotten. They reached the library doors. They were already open. Inside, thousands of books filled towering shelves that disappeared into shadow. A single desk lamp was glowing near the center of the room. On the desk sat an old leather-bound journal. Emily recognized the handwriting immediately. Her grandmother's. She stepped forward, stunned. That is hers. Adrian looked at her. You are certain? I would know that handwriting anywhere. Emily opened the journal with trembling fingers. The first page contained a single sentence. If you are reading this, they have finally found you. Emily's breath caught. Beneath the sentence was a small drawing of the same silver symbol on her wrist. She turned the page. My granddaughter must never be taken to the council. She must never be separated from the king. Emily looked up at Adrian. Why did she write that? Adrian had no answer. Then Emily noticed another line beneath the drawing. The mark does not belong to her. It belongs to both of them. The room seemed to grow colder. Adrian stepped closer to the journal, his expression unreadable. Before either of them could speak, another page turned by itself. A final message appeared in faded ink. When the mark awakens, the king must choose whether to protect the girl or protect the throne. Emily slowly raised her eyes to Adrian. He was already looking at her. Somewhere beyond the library, a door quietly closed. Someone else was inside the estate. And now Emily understood that whatever had begun tonight was far older than either of them had imagined. You were never supposed to find that journal. The voice came from behind them. Emily turned sharply toward the library entrance. Lady Eleanor stood there, her expression more troubled than before. Adrian moved his attention from Eleanor to the open journal. How long have you known? He asked. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She walked toward the desk and carefully studied the faded pages. Long. Enough to understand that the council has been afraid of this night for generations. Emily looked at her. Afraid of me? Not exactly, Eleanor said. Afraid of what your existence means. Emily looked down at the silver mark on her wrist. It had stopped glowing, but the skin around it still felt warm. I still do not understand. Eleanor pointed to the final sentence in the journal. Your grandmother believed the mark was not a symbol of power. It was a bond. Adrian's expression changed. A bond between the human bloodline and the royal bloodline. Emily slowly looked at him. Between you and me? That is what the journal suggests. The answer left Emily silent. She had met Adrian only a handful of times, yet somehow an ancient secret had placed their names together in a story written long before she was born. Then why did my grandmother hide me? Emily asked. Eleanor's voice softened. Because she knew the council would try to control what they did not understand. Adrian closed the journal. And now they know. A distant chime sounded through the estate. Eleanor looked toward the door. The council is gathering. Emily's heart sank. For what? To demand that you be surrendered. Adrian's eyes became cold. They will not have her. Eleanor looked at him carefully. Your Majesty, if you openly refuse the council, this will become a royal dispute. Adrian did not hesitate. Then let it. Emily stepped closer. You cannot keep protecting me from everyone forever. Adrian looked at her. I am not asking you to hide. Then what are you asking? For you to decide whether you trust me. Emily studied his face. Behind the legendary reputation, she saw something she had not expected. Responsibility. He was not protecting her because she was helpless. He was protecting her because he believed she deserved the right to choose her own future. Before she could answer, the library doors opened again. Several council members stood in the corridor. At their center was a tall man named Victor Hale, the council's most influential advisor. His gaze settled on Emily's wrist. The girl must come with us. Adrian stepped forward. No, Victor remained calm. This is not your decision alone. It is now. The room fell silent. Victor looked toward Emily. You have no idea what you carry. Emily surprised herself by answering. Then explain it without treating me like a prisoner. Victor's expression tightened. Adrian glanced at her, and for the first time that night, there was something like respect in his eyes. Victor finally spoke. Very well. The truth is simple. If that mark fully awakens, it will change the balance of the vampire kingdom forever. Emily looked at Adrian. And what happens to you? Victor paused. That is the part your grandmother never wrote down. The silence that followed was deeper than before. Adrian's face remained calm, but Emily suddenly understood that the secret was not only about her. It was about him too. What happens to him? Emily asked. Victor Hale looked at Adrian for a long moment before answering. If the mark fully awakens, the ancient covenant will require the king to make a choice. Emily's voice became quieter. What choice? Victor glanced at the journal. The throne or the bond? The words seemed to settle over the library like a shadow. Emily turned toward Adrian. Is that true? Adrian did not answer immediately. His silence told her enough. You knew, she whispered. I suspected. Since when? Since I saw the mark. Emily looked down at her wrist. And you still told me to stay beside you. Because I will not let the council decide your future. Victor stepped forward. You misunderstand the situation. The covenant is older than the kingdom. If it awakens completely, every vampire in this court will feel its effect. Emily looked at him. What does that mean? It means the royal bloodline may no longer remain entirely under the control of the throne. Adrian's expression remained calm, but his voice carried a quiet certainty. The throne was never meant to control everyone. Victor's eyes narrowed. That is why you are dangerous, Adrian. You have always believed power should have limits. Emily suddenly understood something about the man standing beside her. He was not afraid of losing his authority. He was afraid of becoming the kind of ruler who used it without restraint. My grandmother knew this, Emily said. She knew the council would come for me. Eleanor nodded. She spent years keeping the mark hidden. Emily opened the journal again and searched through the pages. Near the back, she found a small envelope tucked between two sheets of parchment. Her name was written across it in her grandmother's handwriting. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single letter. My dear Emily, if you are reading this, then the secret could no longer remain hidden. You were never chosen to become a queen. You were chosen to remind a king what a crown is supposed to protect. Emily slowly lowered the letter. Adrian had been watching her. What does it say? She handed it to him. His eyes moved across the page, and something changed in his expression. For the first time, Emily saw uncertainty in the vampire king's face. She knew you, Emily said softly. Your grandmother knew more about me than most members of my court. Victor interrupted. Enough. The council cannot allow this to continue. He raised his hand toward the guards. Emily Carter must be escorted to the council chamber. Adrian turned toward him. No, Victor remained firm. You cannot stop an entire council. Adrian's voice was quiet. I do not need to. The guards looked toward him. One by one, they lowered their hands and stepped away from Emily. Victor stared in disbelief. Adrian looked directly at the council. No one takes her anywhere. Emily felt the mark on her wrist grow warm again. Then the journal began to glow. A hidden line appeared beneath her grandmother's final message. The true heir will awaken when the king chooses the girl over his crown. Emily looked at Adrian, realizing the choice had already begun. The eclipse had barely begun to fade when LRA realized the darkness inside Cale was not retreating fast enough. His heartbeat was stronger, but the shadow beneath his skin still moved like a living memory, searching for something to hold on to. Alaric stood beside them, silent, his face wet with tears he no longer tried to hide. LRA kept one hand over Cale's heart and the other against the cold stone beneath him. Do not let go, she whispered. Not yet. Cale's fingers tightened around hers. His eyes remained closed, but his breathing steadied. Then the ancient symbols carved into the tower floor began to glow. One by one, pale silver lines appeared beneath them, forming a circle around the three of them. Oren stared in disbelief. The curse is responding. LRA looked at him. To what? To the forgiveness, he said. The magic was built on hatred. If that hatred is gone, the curse has nothing to feed on. Alaric looked down at his son. Then why is it still here? Before anyone could answer, Cale suddenly inhaled. His eyes opened. They were clear now, the deep twilight blue LRA had seen only once before. He looked at his father first, then at LRA. You, he whispered. His voice was weak, rough from 50 years of silence. LRA's eyes filled with tears. You can speak. Cale tried to smile. I remember your voice. Alaric dropped to his knees beside him, overwhelmed. Cale. His son looked at him for a long moment. Father. The word broke something inside the king. He reached for his son's hand, but stopped just before touching him, as though afraid the moment might disappear. I thought I had lost you. You almost did, Cale whispered. Then his gaze shifted to LRA. She brought me back. LRA shook her head. No, you fought your way back. The silver symbols suddenly flared brighter. A cold wind swept across the tower. LRA staggered. Something was leaving her, pulling at her memories again. Her grandmother's face flashed through her mind. The village, the river, the little house where she had grown up. She grabbed her head. No, Alaric rose immediately. What is happening? Oren's face changed. The curse is not finished. It is transferring. LRA looked at him. Transferring where? He pointed toward the glowing circle. Into the bloodline that carried it here. LRA understood before he finished. The curse had entered her through Seraphine's blood, and now that its grip on Cale was breaking, it was searching for another place to survive. Her. Alaric stepped toward her. There must be another way. LRA looked at Cale, who was awake for the first time in 50 years. Then she looked at the king. There is. Her voice was quiet, but certain. The curse needs someone to carry the pain. So I will not carry it. Alaric stared at her. What does that mean? LRA reached for Cale's hand again. It means I will give it back to where it began. The wind stopped. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the last edge of the eclipse disappeared. And beneath their feet, an ancient symbol opened like a door. The morning arrived quietly, carrying a pale golden light through the windows and settling across the room where everything had changed the night before. For a few moments, there was no movement, only the soft sound of breathing and the distant rhythm of a town beginning another ordinary day. Then she opened her eyes and remembered the conversation from Part 8, every unfinished sentence returning with surprising clarity. She did not feel the same uncertainty she had carried before. Something inside her had finally become steady. She understood that the choice ahead was not about proving who was right or wrong. It was about deciding what kind of future she was willing to build. Across the room, he was already awake, sitting near the window with a cup of coffee between his hands. He looked toward her and gave a small, thoughtful smile. Neither of them spoke immediately. There was no need to rush the moment. After everything they had discovered, silence felt less like distance and more like understanding. Eventually, she walked to the window and looked outside. The familiar street appeared almost different in the morning light. Cars moved along the road. Neighbors opened their doors, and somewhere nearby a dog barked once before the neighborhood became quiet again. Life had continued while they were trying to understand their own lives. He placed the coffee cup on the table and told her that there was something he had not said the night before. She turned toward him, waiting. He explained that the message they had received was not the end of the story. It was a beginning, and there were still questions that needed honest answers. He had spent the early hours thinking about what those answers might mean, and one thing had become clear. They could not keep living according to fear, old expectations, or the mistakes of other people. She listened carefully, then nodded. For the first time, their plans did not feel like an escape. They felt like a direction. Before leaving, she returned to the small table and picked up the photograph that had been there since the beginning of everything. She studied it for a long moment, then placed it safely inside her bag. Whatever happened next, she wanted to remember where the journey had started. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the rooftops. They stepped through the front door together and began walking down the familiar street, not knowing exactly what waited ahead, but finally willing to face it with open eyes. Behind them, the door closed softly. Ahead of them, the road continued into the brightening day, carrying them toward the next answer.